Good afternoon. My name is Yvonne. I'm a librarian here in the Literature Department, which is also home to the Ohio Center for the Book. As one of the state affiliates of the Library of Congress Center for the Book, the Ohio Center for the Book's mission is to promote reading, libraries, and Ohio's literary heritage. And it is authors like today's special guest who keeps that literary heritage strong. I want to say happy National Poetry Month. And on behalf of the Ohio Center for the Book at Cleveland Public Library, I'm thrilled to be here with you today as we host this poetry reading with Ohio's Poet Laureate Kari Gunter Seymour. And before I introduced her, I'd like to tell you something about her. Kari Gunter Seymour is a ninth generation Appalachian and Poet Laureate of Ohio. She holds a BFA in graphic design and an MA in commercial photography. Her poetry collections include A Place So Deep Inside America, It Can't Be Seen, which won the 2020 Ohio Poet of the Year Award, and the chapbook Serving. Her poems have been published in Rattle, Crab Orchard Review, the LA Times, and the New York Times. Kari is the founder and executive director of the Women of Appalachia Project and is editor of the Women of Appalachia Project anthology series, Women Speak. She is editor of I Thought I Heard a Cardinal Sing, Ohio's Appalachian Voices, an anthology that was published last month. Without further ado, I want to welcome Kari Gunter Seymour.
To no one in particular, I am never happy to see summer go, earth stripped of its finest voice. I'm sitting outside in my heavy coat, porch light off. There is no moon, no ambient distractions, the sky a Zion. I take solace in considering the age of this valley, the way water left its mark on Appalachia long before Peabody sunk a shaft, Chevron augured the shale, or ODOT dynamited roadways through steep rock. I grew up in a house where canned fruit cocktail was considered a treat. My sister and I fought over who got to eat the fake cherries. Standouts in the can, though tasting exactly like every other tired piece of fruit floating in the heavy syrup. But it was store-bought, like city folks, and we were too gullible to understand the corruption in the concept. Our mother's home can harvests superior in every way. I cringe when I think of how we shamed her. So much here depends upon a green corn stalk, a patched barn roof, weather, the Lord, community. We've rarely been offered a hand that didn't destroy. Inside the house, the light bulb comes on when the refrigerator door is opened. My husband rummages a snack, plops beside me on the porch to wolf it down, turns, plants a kiss, leans back in his chair, says to no one in particular, a person could spend a lifetime under a sky such as this. Well, hello, everyone. Yeah. Hello. Thank you. Thank you so
Kari.
much for having me in today, Yvonne, and all of you from here at the Ohio Center for the Book at the Cleveland Public Library. And this last poem was to no one in particular. And as Yvonne pointed out, I've done this anthology, this beautiful anthology, and that poem is in here. And as she mentioned, all of my books are available. You can find them right on my website, which is just my name, Kari Gunter Seymour, poet.com. And you can find all the books right on there if you're interested in purchasing. And there are 183 poems in this beautiful anthology from 133 Ohio Appalachian poets or poets who are somehow connected to Appalachian, Ohio. So as Yvonne mentioned, I'm a ninth generation Appalachian, and my work is firmly and unapologetically connected to my home soil. This little book of mine, A Place So Deep Inside America It Can't Be Seen, talks all about Appalachia, and you'll realize that I am very connected. And I like to think that my work examines the long-lasting effects of stereotype and the false narratives that surround Appalachians. That image that was developed by Big Coal when they wanted to come in and take all the minerals out of our land, and they started calling us hillbillies and white trash and hicks. So my people were immigrants. My mama's great-grandfather, Adam McClure, came to this country from Belfast, Northern Ireland. And my daddy's people were Welsh. And 9 generations ago, John Gunter III and his wife, Joanna, left England to settle in Henrico, Virginia. And this was the early 1700s, and there was a lot of coal mining and iron mining happening. And it's now known as Henrico County, and you'll find Richmond there. And I think a lot of Appalachia, the real Appalachia, as a place that most people don't truly understand. And mainstream media does not help. In fact, it perpetrates the myths. So this poem is the very first poem in my little book, and it's called I Come From a Place So Deep Inside America It Can't Be Seen. White oaks thrash. Moonlight drifts the ceiling as if I'm underwater. Propane coils warms my bones. Gone are the magics and songs, all the things our grandmothers buried, piles of feathers and angel bones, inscribed by all who came before. When I was 12, my cousins called me ugly, enough to make it last. Tonight, a celebrity on Oprah imagines a future where features can be removed and replaced on a whim. A moth presses wings thin as paper against my window, more beautiful than I could ever be. Ryegrass raised seedy heads beyond the bull thistle and preen. Everything alive aches for more. So my family has always been musical. My mama played the piano and my daddy played guitar. He taught me to play the guitar. I tried for the piano. I didn't have much luck. But music plays a really important role in the Appalachian culture. We can all be feuding and have vast differences in opinion, but somebody brings out a mandolin and a banjo and a guitar, and that's it. Everybody's toe is tapping. Many people are dancing. And a lot of times those differences are forgotten. They dissolve inside the music. And so this next poem I wrote in honor of my daddy and also Hank Williams. I don't know how much y'all know about Hank Williams. He was known as the Hillbilly Shakespeare. And Ken Burns did a series on PBS of country music, and he dedicated an entire session to Hank Williams. Yeah. And Hank Williams was at the top of the charts. He was an amazing lyricist and was doing appearances all over. And he received an injury and hurt his back, and it was so bad that he needed medicated. And so he started medicating, and he would have a need a lot of times when he was traveling, and so he would end up stopping places to be medicated. And at that time, I think it must have been by syringe. And so his very last ride ended in West Virginia. He was on his way to Canton, Ohio for a gig. And so my daddy, being a World War II vet and loving Hank so much, and I thought a lot about that when I watched the Ken Burns special, and this poem came to me. And so I'll not say a whole lot more, but just let you know that it's called Hank Williams' Last Ride. I knew all the words to move it on over before I could walk properly. Daddy loved Hank, and that was good enough for me. Move over, skinny dog, 'cause a fat dog's moving in. My toddler melodies hitting every trill and dip. Daddy strumming G, C, G, D. His foot, a thumping tick hound scratching fleas. He died hard, my daddy. Not like Hank, addicted to morphine and booze. But he was blue, and Hank knew the blues. Tonic tunes, Daddy called them. What might his life have been if he'd played honky tonks instead of signing up for a front row seat in the Pacific Ocean Theater thick with Japs and dead brothers? Or better still, if he'd not come home with a metal plate in his head and coal being the only means to make a living wage in the mountains. What might Hank's life have been if his heart had not given out? If he'd never checked in at the Andrew Johnson Hotel and Charles Carr moved on over so my daddy could drive to Canton. Not that far from the foothills of the Appalachians, where I sat singing all sass and twang as if somebody's life depended on it.
That was good. You have a beautiful voice.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. So as time went by, many of my people on my daddy's side, and that's the side of the family that I know the most about, moved from Henrico County into North Carolina. And then they ended up going down into South Carolina, Wagner's South Carolina, which was one time known as Pentertown. But in 1807, it was known as Gunter's Crossroads or Guntersville, because such a large number of Carolinian settlers were named Gunter.
Oh, okay.
And by then, my family had become tobacco farmers. So my great-great-great-grandparents ended up leaving Wagner or Guntersville when they heard about an opportunity to make a new settlement to be called Aiken, South Carolina. Because for them, Guntersville was getting too crowded, which is ironic because Aiken is one of the largest cities in the South, so it's just kind of ironic. So when Aiken was celebrating their 150th anniversary of the founding, I stumbled upon a newsletter that had been produced when they were starting to settle Aiken. And they had this to say about my great-great-great-great-grandmother. Her name was Patience. And it was written shortly after she arrived in Aiken. And so this is a direct quote. She was a strong woman, stubborn, who drove one of the Conestoga wagons. She was chewing tobacco and smoking a corncob pipe. So you know they were rich because she was doing both. Her shoes were big and loose and rough, and she wore on her head that milliner's creation you call a poke bonnet. Now, here's my favorite part. In spite of her gray hair, she looked brave enough to tackle a den of wildcats. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, it is. And it always makes me wonder, when you were reading or reciting that, it made me wonder, well, I tried to picture her and I'm like, I bet she was a small woman with that attitude, and can do and strength, so I don't know. I don't know if you know, but I just pictured a strong woman that surprised a lot of people.
Exactly. And there was even more written about my grandfather, who's very cantankerous as well. But there had to be, right? Because think about it, she's a gray-haired woman. She's driving a Conestoga wagon. Now, those Conestoga wagons were known to hold up to 6 tons, and they had 6 to 8 oxen or mules, which means she was holding on to those reins, keeping those animals at bay and concentrating so they didn't tip the wagon over, tip the 6 tons of goods over, right? So what an amazing woman. And she took off to a place that wasn't even a place yet. And my family did that a lot early on, which I'm so proud of. And so from South Carolina, my family ended up then moving into Tennessee and then to Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
So now when we came to Ohio, that's when my mama's family and my daddy's family blend up because, of course, they got married.
Mm-hmm.
So my mama's sisters, my aunts, out-migrated during World War II to work in the factories in Northern Ohio. And y'all have to understand, this was not done. Young farm women did not leave the farm unless they got married and went to another farm. So here they were taking off to the big city to get jobs in the factories. So of course I had to write a poem about strong women and working women. And so when I started thinking about this particular poem, the other woman who came into my mind was Dolly Parton, because we all know that she's our Gloria Steinem, right?
Yeah.
So Appalachia's Gloria Steinem. So anyway, this poem is called Perfect Pitch. And if anybody's got the book and they're reading along, it's page 48. Perfect Pitch. I rode middle school bound in the back seat of my aunt's station wagon. Listened to her and Mama sing Jolene. Trading verses, harmonizing on the chorus. I'm begging of you, please don't take my man. A few years later, it was 9:25. They were fired up and it was Dolly's doing. This was rural Ohio, the bottom lip of northern Appalachia, right shy of Perry Como country. The women in the family worked the TS trim factory, spitting out Honda car parts. Started out on the assembly line, worked their way up to paint, then detailing, then welding. The physical labor made their bodies strong, their future bright, and like Dolly, they weren't taking any shit. They learned early on about strikes and picket lines, how important it was to organize and vote. Brave women in the workforce, determined to see their daughters inside college classrooms the hell out of Factory Row. I didn't know then I was being raised by a feminist taking back her power. Like Dolly, my mama would never use that word, no matter how much she embodied it. She was proud to hang up her welder's helmet end of shift, pick up her paycheck, sing in the front seat of a station wagon with women she loved.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I love that. And as a matter of fact, this particular book, or your poetry, A Place So Deep Inside America Can't Be Seen, and you dedicate it to, if you don't mind me reading it, to every woman in my life who has befriended, loved, and looked after me, I hold you dear. And this collection mentions a lot of, one woman in particular, Fannie June. And I was wondering if that's a person in your family, or is that a composite character for the women that you're honoring in this collection?
It is a composite character. My step grandmother's name was Fannie, and we all adored her. She was a strong woman. She kept our family focused and together. And my birthday's in June, and I like to think of myself as a little bit like Fannie. So there's Fannie June, and the other character is Ruby May. And my other grandmother's name was Ruby, and my mama's middle name was May. Oh. And so that's Ruby May.
That really works nicely. When I read a book of poetry, the first thing as I read poems throughout, what I like to do is make notes on the front page when they're fresh in my memory about what I'm reading. And one of the things that came to my mind after reading this collection was that I thought of something that people usually say about fiction, about novels, and that this was a good read. Every poem in it, I connected with it. I don't know if it's because of my Appalachian roots, but I don't think so. I think a lot of these poems some are specific and some so not, so much not. And then, you know, with the way you make descriptions in your poems, it speaks to something specific in which we, well, for me anyway, I felt a connection to and an experience from reading the poem. I got to see from your description the world of that poem. No, that's all I wanted to say about that, because I just thought it was a good read. You know, you're telling stories about the people in your life, the people of Appalachia, you know, the traditions, the land, and everything that you hold dear. So I won't go on talking. I just want you to read some more poems, but I just wanted to make that comment since we were talking about the women in your life and the women of Appalachia.
I thank you for that, Yvonne, because I couldn't ask for any better of anybody to read and get any better than that. That's exactly what I hope people will do. So thank you so much. That's the highest compliment I could receive, and I'm grateful. And and when you read the inscription, I get a little teary-eyed because that is so true and so meaningful to me. When I think about my ancestors and all that they did without to make the next generation have a better life, and the next generation have a better life, and the next generation have a better life because of the work that was done before. And because of all that, I am allowed to sit here and be a poet. You know, I don't have to grow my own food if I don't want to. I don't have to raise animals to be able to survive. You know, I can go to the doctor, all those things that are a given now, because my people worked so hard before me. And this next poem I was going to share with you is again about strong women. I guess I landed on that theme today. And I guess you're right. The book is pretty much about strong women, though there are men in the book. We love our men too, and our children. But this one's about the pack horse librarians. And I thought it was appropriate to read today because we're here at the library. And the pack horse librarians is an amazing story, because during the Great Depression, the New Deal program brought books to Kentuckians living in the remote areas and in the mountains. Oh my God, sometimes you couldn't get in and out of there but one season a year, you know, because of the swollen rivers, and then it would be snow, and then it'd be swollen rivers again and waterways. So these women were just amazing. And again, I want you to remember, this was a time when women were not leaving the home. They left the home. They went to another home to either be with relatives or a husband. So this is Pack Horse Librarians, page 23. I mean no disrespect when I say, during the Great Depression, Eastern Kentucky was a sundered area. Surrounded by mountains and waterways, no easy access in or out, nor any proper education, until the WPA employed our grandmothers to pack saddle literacy to the underserved. This would be the only good thing Cole would do for Kentucky. Cole and the Presbyterians, donating books and endowment, $28 a month to any woman with a horse or a mule and the spunk to stand up for progress, brave the weather, backwaters and hollers, to deliver emancipation by means of bound dissertation. You need to understand, this was Appalachia just before the war to end all wars. Only women of disrepute were considered working women by the church. Christian women labored in the kitchen and fields, birthed, prayed, died in them, albeit many Christian women were taught to read, if for no other reason than the Lord's word could be used to hold her back. But this was the New Deal and all bets were off. Imagine my grandmother, top of her head barely level with the saddle's front rigging, flaming red hair, a brand of sass all her own. Packing up at the Pine Mountain Settlement School, Harlan County, creek beds as roads, on foot, single file across crag and cliff top, sleeping in barns or lean-tos against the cold. Deliberate as any lineman or mail carrier, every treatise she carried a nugget of gold inside her saddlebags.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful too. That's
These
wonderful.
were very brave women, brave women
Yeah.
to just take off, sleep outside under the stars. Oh my goodness. So now moving on,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how many of you know about our granny women.
Granny women.
Because granny women, even today, our granny women are the go-to experts on medicinal plants and tinctures and poultices. And there's really a good deal of science behind it. They have a medical practice, so to speak. And a lot of times it's handed down generation to generation, or it can be in an apprentice style fashion, but not just anyone can be a granny woman. You have to have the gift. Okay. So you're born with the gift. It's kind of like intuition or extrasensory perception, something like that, maybe. And there are still people in the mountains that won't doctor with anybody but the granny women. And as you can imagine, they tend to look earthy, and they're reclusive, and most of them live off the grid or somewhat, and they like to live deep in nature because that's where they harvest, right? They harvest a lot of their goods from the woods, and and then they of course grow many. And so outliers, folks not from Appalachia, they find our granny women mysterious and, kind of magical. So this poem is called Last Night, the Chime of Tree Frogs, and it's page 32. Granny woman dances under green, shivering branches, her skirts a waltz of wings. Mouthful of stories, she has emptied her house of men. Out the side of her eye, the soft blur of rabbit and watchful dusk. Air ripe with herbs and tinctures, the echo of gasping roots. She is the nighthawk, sprung from chalky shell, issuing her raspy beut for all the names she gives the night. Surviving passages so narrow, they felt like birth canals. Every dawn she can remember crushed between her teeth. She will cradle you, deliver you from one mud to the next. Anointer, holder of upended petals and misplaced halos. I saw her in the dark morning, glimmer and dust.
Ooh. It's fascinating. I mean, that speaks to the. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, please. No, please.
I was looking at the poem on the page, and I wrote traditions, and so that's the first thing I thought of after reading this, traditions of the people, and the at one time granny women were a necessity, a real necessity, and like you say, there are some people who still use the granny women. And but that's the first thing I thought of, tradition, and it reminded me of my grandparents, my grandmother in particular, who knew every herb, growing on their farm, and even used them to, as salves for healing. So that just took me right back there after when I was reading this poem. And are the granny women, are they usually older women, or are they younger women, or just depends on their skill or knowledge, and age doesn't matter?
Age actually doesn't matter because it's such a gift, but the training does take a while. I mean, I think that they're mature, and by that I mean they're probably most of them that people will go to would be in their late 20s and maybe older. But the ones who are most coveted and held in highest esteem are the older granny women, because people, I mean, you can just tell that they know
Mhm.
exactly what they're doing, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And I have several granny poems, and there's another in this book called Planting by the Signs that talks about a granny woman who knows when to plant and when to harvest and when
Mm.
to bake the cakes and when to cut your hair, and that they pull children back from fever, you know, by the
Right.
signs. And I have a poem all about the pandemic and what the granny woman does to prepare for the pandemic, you know. So
Wow.
it's been a fascination with me, to share the granny women, because for us they're important. They're important
Yeah,
part of our culture, and like you said, tradition.
yeah. Wonderful.
So I just have a couple more poems if we have time, Yvonne. I know you had
Yeah,
some questions, so okay.
yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to hear.
Well,
I think we'd all like to hear some more.
okay. Okay, wonderful. So I have a new book coming out from Ohio University, Swallow Press, and it's titled Alone in the House of My Heart. And the reason I wanted to share this poem today, is because the pandemic has been so hard. When you and I first got on, Yvonne, we were talking about that and how, you know, everybody's kind of a little bit tired of Zoom, but we're also very grateful for it because it has kept us connected. And but it's been very hard on us. And so this is kind of a welcome spring poem. Um, and I don't know about any of y'all, but I actually lost a loved one during the pandemic, and so it's just all been very trying and difficult. And I applaud us all for getting through this and still having our right minds, because it's been so challenging. And so anyway, spring's here, and this poem is called Vernal Equinox, which we just you know, we just experienced, not but a few couple weeks at the most back, maybe not quite that long, or maybe just a bit more. Anyway, vernal equinox. I've been thinking about last times I never knew were the last. Grandma cooing me unconscious, daddy whistling me home to supper, my toddler's toothless grin, tiny fingers clenching wildflowers. The last time I prayed, desperate for those departed, how they flit ahead of us flying. Tonight the Big Dipper balances on its handle. Tepid tree frogs peep songs of resurrection. One morning soon, I'll eat a good breakfast, fill a water bottle, pack a book, walk the fence row into the holler, rest beneath the eagle's favorite perch, shake off this inexplicable sadness. 2 cinder blocks where lungs ought to be. Let spring hold on to me for a while.
I want to ask you a couple of questions. You're so accomplished. I want to talk about a few things. First of all, I want to talk about your BFA in graphic design and an MA in commercial photography. So, how did you find your way to poetry?
It's 2-layered, really. I found my way to poetry as a means of therapy because I was experiencing trauma, and I started journaling. And then someone mentioned, you ought to try poetry because it really makes you focus in, which is so true. You know, you want to find the perfect word for every word you put in a poem, you know, so it really makes you focus in. But the asset of having that background in graphic design and photography worked out for me like this, because graphic design is all about organizing information so that your audience sees what you want them to see first, and then second, and then third, and then last, and on and on and on, right? Well, that is a poem.
Right.
You
Right.
want people to get it, maybe from the title, or at least entice
Right.
them, and then on you go, right? And then photography, what is photography but a moment in time? And what is a poem but moments or a moment in time?
Right.
So it was a seamless transition for me to use the skill set I had to become a poet. And I started writing in 2009.
Oh, okay.
So I'm fairly young in the poet world, you know, as that goes.
Well, it reminds me of that saying, poetry is the best
Yes,
words in the best order. So that works out, right?
yes, it does. Yes, it does. It's a perfect quote.
Another question I had it's about your work with the Women of Appalachia Project. And
Uh-huh.
there's one thing, I noticed that you said that, you're unapologetically Appalachian. And if you don't mind, I was on the your website, Women of Appalachia Project, and the statement is, if you are from Appalachia, you grow to realize early on that many people have an image of an Appalachian woman and they look down on her. And then that struck me. And then you said to embrace the stereotype, and that act of defiance there in your poetry that's so authentic, and you're writing what you know and you're putting it out there, so um how did you come by that? I mean, to say that.
It's how I feel. And that project, by the way, we do an anthology every year. And again, you can find these beautiful books, 80, 90 poets, storytellers, singer-songwriters, and there's fine art in them as well. I'll show you one of the little pieces of fine art.
Yeah.
And so I was submitting work to art shows and to journals, and getting back these notes saying things like trying too hard to be ethnic. It's like, what? Too colorful, these. Anyway, it made me angry.
Right,
And I
right.
thought, I'm a communications marketing person. I can do an art show. I can make a book. So I did. And the whole idea was supposed to be one time, to do an art show and a poetry reading. And that was back in 2009. And the attendance and the enthusiasm for that event, which was held at Ohio University at the Multicultural Center, which I want to applaud them. Dr. Winsome Chenu could see clearly that Appalachian women were a minoritized group of people, Appalachia in general, and she agreed to take on, the exhibit and the reading. And the response was so positive. And so I did it a second year, and then here we are. This is the 13th year, and we're still going strong.
Oh, wow.
And
Great.
and like I
Yeah.
said, our little bitty book has turned into this, this huge anthology that we put together every year.
Sure.
And it's true. I mean, people do look down on Appalachians even still. And I think there have been a few authors that have contributed to that bootstraps myth, that if you just get up off your lazy butt and do something, it is not that way. I can assure you, when your land has been completely raped and is unfarmable for an entire generation, and big coal leaves you to starve to death, pulls out and leaves a whole generation to starve to death, what can I say to that but shame on you? And then as we have recovered from big coal, and these are hardworking people, we're the hardworking people.
Sure.
And we get hurt. We get hurt, and they sent our jobs overseas. And then here comes Big Pharma. Oh boy, we're ripe for that, aren't we? Because we're getting injured and we're depressed. So Big Pharma said, yeah, ooh, yeah. So they set up clinics all over West Virginia and Ohio. And, we are the top 2 in the nation for overdose deaths. And it's really, really awful. And so that is why I felt like I needed to do the Women of Appalachia Project. And I thought I heard a cardinal saying, because I don't believe in violence of any kind, but I do believe in activism. And I think our voices, our work, can do that hard work. We don't need to carry signs. We don't need to shout. We don't need to have frontal, right on confrontations, but our work if you read it with an open mind, I can't imagine anybody not being moved by it, at least some of
Right.
the pieces. And so that's why I do what I do.
Well, I think poetry is the perfect medium for that. You know, we make connections through poetry. You know, we may pick up something that we've never read before, but find out in the poetry what's inside the collection. We have commonalities with. We have a connection with that person. So, and it makes us feel better. So, I applaud you and all the things that you do. I think it's unfortunate that no culture or region should be stereotyped based on one book or film, as it were. So,
Yes, thank you. We're both talking about the same one, I can tell.
Yeah.
He who shall not be named.
Yes. One thing I want to ask you about was how has working with the Women of Appalachia Project and being the Ohio's Poet Laureate affected your working process for your own work?
Well, it's been challenging, I must say, because I believe in service, and I feel very strongly about serving. During my first 18 months as the Poet Laureate, I did 150 events, activities, workshops, which I could have never done if it hadn't been pandemic, because if I'd had to travel, I wouldn't have been able to do that much. But I, before the governor decided he wanted me to do a second term, I already had 30 events planned for this year going into it, based around traveling with, I Thought I Heard a Cardinals thing, and many others. I love working with high schools, and I've done some work, even sixth graders, seventh graders. I love that. I've worked with incarcerated teens and adults. I've worked with women in recovery. I just feel really strongly about that work, but I also need to write because, like I said, it's therapy for me. So on the weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, I set aside a few hours on each one of those days to write. And so all week long, I'm thinking about what I might want to write about. Sometimes I jot down notes, and I find them all over the house. And sometimes I have a whole poem written just all over the house on little pieces of paper, or I'm serious,
Yeah.
or nearly a poem. So, so that's my process right now. And I'm not saying that it's a whole lot different than what it was before, because I am a person who has to think and wait for the poem to come. It comes in little spurts for me. So, so in a weird way, I might have a better practice now because I have set aside that time for myself to do it.
I see.
And if I have events, like today, I have an event on Saturday, that's fine, because I'm still going to carve out some time, later this afternoon, or maybe more time tomorrow, whichever. But yeah, that's sort of what I do it. And as I said, I have a new book coming out that was written over the last year. It won't be out until fall. And then I'm working on chapbook, so I just, keep my head down.
That's great. You always seem to be really busy with your projects and everything, and the anthologies. And one more question as of you as an editor. Given that you have edited numerous poetry anthologies, what do you struggle with most as an editor, as opposed to a poet, in achieving your goals for a collection?
Well, the hardest thing for me is turning anybody down. I wish I could accept every single piece of work that's submitted. I really, really, really wish I could. And that's why I always invite jurors to go through the first round for me and make their, share their considerations with me. That helps me. And I do take very dearly to heart all that my jurors say and those they select, but there are many times that I take poems they did not select as well, because I find value in those. And I love that method of having not just myself selecting work, but at least two other minds. And with the Women of Appalachia project, I always have a poet and a storyteller. You know, so they're coming from different disciplines, still writers. I also try to have one that's academic and one that is non-academic, again, because sometimes a person can get so held up on the line breaks or where the comma is that they might miss the story. And that's where my editing comes in, right? If it's a good poem, or especially a good poem, the line breaks are not what they might be to make it stronger, then I will work with that person to help them, you know, reconsider their line breaks. So I think that is always the hard part for me. Is I hate writing, you know, having to send out those rejection letters. And I tell them what a gift. Every single piece that I receive is such a gift. And I do read every single one of them and take it into my heart. And I am just feel so blessed by it. And I just want them to try again. You know, I want them to try again.
It's wonderful. And that's a wonderful attitude too. You know, when you read poetry, I sometimes I think of it like as if I'm meditating, you know, because you're in that stillness for the moment you're reading that poem, and your world at that moment are those words on the page and what you're reading and what you're seeing based on those words. I guess journaling did help in your poetry. You're very gifted. So, you seem to have a good ear because you choose the right words, you know, based on this collection I'm hearing now, and me having lived 8 years of my life in Appalachia and connecting with it. So when did you realize that you could put it out there to be published?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I'm going to just hop back 1 second and say, I advise everyone to journal. And when I teach workshops, we do free writing, which is journaling. You know, when you free write, that's what you do in your journal. And I just think that's a great way to start writing poetry, because then you can excavate, you know, you can take the good parts out and then make a poem out of it, you know, and lots of times it's all there, you know. And after I do an hour workshop, most people can pull a poem out of that. And that's kind of what I did with the journaling and continue to do with the free writing. But as far as I can tell you, those first poems I wrote were just horrible. And I had to do, you know, I had to go to poetry readings. I had to hear, like you said, I had to hear what other people were doing and saying, and how their words were impactful. And I think a reading is a really good way to experience that, because you hear it from the poet's voice. I did send poems out and got rejected. Like I said, that's kind of one of the reasons I started the Women of Appalachia project. But I also took to heart that not everybody could be a meanie, and that I needed to go back into the poems and revise. And so I think revision is so necessary and powerful. Put those poems away for a while, come back to them later. They'll look completely different to you. And I literally, a lot of my poems, I go through every single word to look for the right word, literally.
Yeah.
And it takes me a long time to write them. And when I started doing that, then I started getting published. And I certainly wasn't getting a whole bunch published early on. And still the journal, Marianne Worthington out of Kentucky, that beautiful Appalachian journal, which is my favorite of the Appalachian journals, probably for that reason, took my very first poem. And it thrilled me no end. And it gave me hope and the courage to go on. But I also want to tell people, I don't think publication defines us. I think if you need to write poetry, write poetry. You don't have to publish if you don't want to. If it heals you, and you need to write it, write it. It doesn't mean you have to put yourself out there and let somebody make fun of you, because that happens too.
Yeah, I agree. I agree totally. I agree totally, because I write, well, I used to, I haven't I've been away from it from a long time, but that's exactly why I did it. I didn't have any designs to be published. I just did it because I wanted to see if I could, for one thing. And plus, after writing it, I wanted to continue because it made me feel good too. So yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. I want to say to anyone, to the audience, if you want to say, Kari, where people can find your books again, if they want to buy your book, and also mention your website.
Thank you so much. My publisher for all of these books, for I Thought I Heard a Cardinal Sing, my own personal A Place So Deep Inside America It Can't Be Seen, and the Women Speak series, which there are 7 of these anthologies now, can be found on Sheila Nagig blog. Now, I know that's hard to remember. So if you don't remember that, just my name, all lowercase, Kari Gunter Seymour, no dash, poet. Kari Gunter Seymour poet.com, and click on books. There's a little navigation at the top that says books, and you click on there and all the books are there and where to get them. And there's reviews you can look at if you want to read the reviews before you buy the books. I think the only one that doesn't have any reviews might be Cardinal, because it just came out last month. We launched Cardinal on March the 16th. So yes, visit my website. I have poems up, have photography up. Just visit around there.
Oh, speaking of photography, we got 3 minutes left, and I want you to speak a little bit about Barbie's on Hard Times photographs, and they're part of the Women Speak anthology. So if you want to just speak a little bit about that.
It's funny because I did those for therapy as well. And I put Barbie in compromising situations that every woman goes through every day. You know, like the idea that those silly high heels she wears, you know, that she might fall down in them, because I certainly couldn't wear them, you know. And so one of them is she falls down. One of them, she has a piece of toilet paper stuck to her shoe, you know. She's trying to bake and the whole kitchen's a mess and she's a mess. She's left at the altar. She's standing outside the church like this, looking for the groom, you know. So it's a whole series I did as therapy, you know, because weight loss was a big deal. I have a poem on Sheila Nagig online that's called Hella Barbie. It talks about Barbie. And the whole point of those really was therapy and fun. But ironically, a professor at Ohio University saw that series and invited me to apply for grad school, which is how I ended up getting my master's in commercial photography, was from that Barbie series, which is just serendipitous, you know. So you never know what you do might lead to so much else.
That's so right. That's so right. So as our time is winding down, I want to thank you, Kari, again for being here so much. I so enjoyed this. You're a wonderful reader and I love your work. So I can't wait for the new collection to come out this fall.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. You've been just the most wonderful hostess and I really appreciate that. And I just loved being here today. And maybe in the future sometime I can make the trip up and meet you all in person.
Yeah, that would be great. We can invite you back, you know, that would be great in person. So yeah, so I want to say thanks again, and thanks to everyone who joined us here today. And this recording will be uploaded on Ohio Center for the Book Facebook page. If you don't see it today, check back, we'll get it there. So again, thank you all for coming, and thanks again, Kari, and take care, be safe and well.
You too. Thanks so much.